right? We understood that
Yeah.
the culture that we were brought up in policing, a lot of it, unfortunately, is kind of modeled by Hollywood and by these external forces. It's this realization that as leaders, it's our responsibility to model a more adaptive, forward-thinking culture, and very much servant-minded, very much let's throw the ego and arrogance out the door, and let's serve our own staff, right, internally. And when we serve and treat our own people that way, we know that innately they'll do the same to the communities that they serve.
Welcome to Be Bold Branding, where we discuss the power of differentiating yourself through your own unique story and standout personal brand.
What if the solution to transforming police culture isn't external oversight, but internal revolution? While departments nationwide grapple with transparency, accountability, and public trust, a select group of forward-thinking leaders is taking a radically different approach. That's why we invited Chris Hsiung, a founding member and executive director of The Curve, a nonprofit he created with Simon Sinek, to share how he's empowering police leaders to modernize their departments from within. After 28 years in law enforcement and serving as Mountain View, California's police chief, Chris has cracked the code on building adaptive leadership cultures that meet today's challenges head on.
Chris, welcome to Be Bold Branding.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here.
Let's start with a background. That's always what we like to find out, and getting to know our guests a little bit. What got you into police business? How did you grow up? Where did you grow up? Give us some cliff notes of the background.
Sure thing. I born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was one of those kids who grew up and I saw a police officer in uniform at a young age, and I thought that's exactly what I want to be. And despite my parents' best efforts trying to talk me out of it, in high school where they make you pair up to different professions, I tried all of those. I knew in my mind I wasn't going to be in an office all day, which is really funny and ironic because the last 10 to 15 years of my career were spent in an office. So yes, it's truly a calling. It's something I've absolutely enjoyed.
Oh, excellent. Well, let's start off by telling us about The Curve. Most of our audience will be familiar with Simon Sinek.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about The Curve and how you got connected with Simon Sinek in the first place to bring this nonprofit about.
And before, actually, if I could cut ahead, Chris, and even before that, because I like to share linkability. My stepfather, who I consider my father, 31 years in the police force. My best friend, 27 years in the police force. His brother, 25 years in the police force. His father, 40 years in the police force. Wow. So, yeah, this really does hit close to home. So just want to share that connectability right there for the audience. But
absolutely. Thank you. It's a great story. The beginning of the story is really actually interesting because it goes about 10 years prior to actually meeting Simon, and that's because as a young aspiring supervisor in the police department, my police chief at the time assigned one of Simon's first books, Starts With Why, as reading material in order to test for promotion. So I grew up in a police department that was the Mountain View Police Department, where to be a leader, you had to start reading these books that were outside of the profession. So in the summer of 2020, if you'll recall, where the nation is really grappling with policing and communities kind of rising up and all the civil discourse, Simon's one of those guys, one of those leaders that really likes to fix impossible problems. And he had friends in the police business. He had friends that were very concerned about just the state of the way the country was. And he approached a few leaders in policing that he knew, Jack Cawley, who's the chief of the Castle Rock Police Department at the time, and also the guy that was profiled in the third book, Infinite Game, approached Jack and said, hey, can you get together some of the more forward-thinking leaders that you know in police departments from across the country? And myself being a big Simon fan at the time, you can imagine the glee. I was like, wow, I got invited to this Zoom session. And that Zoom session turned into this realization that regardless of where we were in the country, all of us as leaders in policing who had grown up in the industry felt like there has to be more. There has to be a path through this difficult time in policing. And for us, the conclusion was culture, right? We understood that the culture that we were brought up in policing, a lot of it, unfortunately, is kind of modeled by Hollywood, right? Mm-hmm. And by these external forces. It's this realization that as leaders, it's our responsibility to model a more adaptive, forward-thinking culture, and very much servant-minded, very much let's throw the ego and arrogance out the door, and let's serve our own staff, right, internally. And when we serve and treat our own people that way, we know that innately they'll do the same to the communities that they serve.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And, if you go to thecurve.org, you can learn more about this organization. And I read through the materials before we jumped on here today. And just a fascinating, it was really, I think, what the catalyst for pulling it all together was the George Floyd situation, right?
That's correct, yes. And the unique part about American policing is that there are 18,000 police departments in this country. And so that there's 18,000 different cultures, some great, dynamic, forward thinking, and some that honestly just need a lot of change and modernizing, right? And so you're correct. The George Floyd incident was kind of this hallmark incident in the timeline of American policing where we really needed to look within and go, where did we come from? Where are we now? And more importantly, where are we headed into the future?
Yeah. So let's dig into that a little bit. Drawing from your 28 years of experience, and then also working with the Curve, what's the most significant cultural shift that you've witnessed, and how is the Curve preparing the departments for future challenges that we might not even see coming?
So what's interesting is, the history of policing. We took a lot from the military, and our military institutions are incredible. And it's like, while we took the best and coolest parts of it, we forgot to adapt, much like the military has. I mean, if you look at the military branches today, they continue to send their best and brightest to learning institutions outside of the military, right? Graduate school programs, and then they adapt, they evolve. Very broadly and generally speaking, in policing, we forgot that part, right? We kind of continue to just stay insular. There's culturally, it's like, oh, we don't need to learn from other sectors or anything. We know what's best for us, right? And you got generations of that. And at the Curve, we kind of take a different approach, which is at the very crux of it, we are humans who are leading and serving humans within our department, who are serving other humans in the community. And when you take this human look at it, then you understand that you can actually learn from the hospitality community. You can learn from private sector, from business, because all of these sectors all deal with humans dealing with humans. And as you know, and as we know, it's not easy dealing with personnel issues, with having difficult conversations. The topic of vulnerability we talk a lot about in the Curve, which is leaders should model courageous vulnerability, because if you go into a meeting in a room and you pretend that you know everything, which is generally the default culture of a rank-based, right, profession, is, hey, shut your mouth, I outrank you, so I clearly must have all the answers.
Right.
Things don't happen, bad things happen when you play that out, right? But if you have a different type of leader who walks in there and goes, hey, look, I don't have all the answers here, and I'm relying on all of you around the room because I really don't know what to do in this moment. Please, give me your input. You create this environment where people can talk, people can kind of raise their hand. And so, we understand that that's also very helpful in the community, right? What's the worst situation or feeling is when an officer is talking down to someone and they don't feel truly heard, as opposed to an officer who, really has nothing to prove. Then they understand the value of spending an extra minute or two, making sure a community member, it just feels truly heard in a moment. That's where true communication opens up and things get solved.
Mm-hmm.
This is a little bit parallel to what you're talking about, but we all grow up in very different cultures. So not only do you have a police force culture and 18,000 different cultures out there, right? But you have all these different human beings that come into that place with their own set of cultural values. And one of the things that I remember my dad kind of tongue in cheek saying as I was growing up, do as I say, not as I do, right? I don't know how many of you out there have heard this before, but I have.
In that era.
Yeah, I grew up in that era too. And I used to think, well, that's just a terrible way to lead, right? But in some respects, that is kind of what we're doing as a society. Just when you mentioned outrank, and of course, as a parent, your parents, you always outrank your kids, right? But it begins in the home with that type of culture too, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Like I'm a father of 4, and I remember some of the best parenting advice I got was, especially when the kids are teenagers, you look at them and the power of a parent going, hey, I made a mistake. Let's talk that through. Holy cow, the learning curve goes exponential, right? But in the workplace environment, Same thing, right? If you have a boss that pretends they know everything, that is the worst environment to work under. And I've worked under that, right? And
Sure.
the irony is the second that boss leaves the room, everyone in the room's like, oh, they are so wrong, right? But I've also had the opposite kind of boss who walks in and they're competent, they're experienced, but they have no ego, and they sit there and go, hey, I don't have all the answers, but if we don't have it, let's go learn it together, right? And if you make a mistake, I'm your safety net. And I had a couple of those mentors along the way, and guess which one I like to emulate as I rose through the ranks, right? So,
Yeah.
that's what we're trying to bring across the country, is the importance in calling that out, that, just because you have the rank does not make you a leader.
Like what you're hearing? Hit that subscribe button and learn how you can change how you're seen and charge what you're worth.
So,
Fostering leadership. And I guess the end goal, right, is going to be respect for the badge. That we like, anybody that thinks we don't need police officers is nuts. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like,
Right.
we happen to support our police officers. Of course, I told you up front, I have a close affinity to it. I have had my fair share of not run-ins with the law. I'm not necessarily a crook, but I've been pulled over a lot. We got pulled over the other day coming home from an
No, you
event.
did.
And, you treat them with respect. You never really have.
Absolutely.
I never run into a problem with a problem. But I know that I live in a community where we have incredible police officers, friends with a lot of them. Just, we still are lucky enough, Tanya and I, to live in a fairly small town. And not everybody has that opportunity, but I assume that is the end goal, right? That we're going to teach the society as a whole to hold respect for that badge. That person really is a servant and really sacrificing a lot for people
Yes.
that don't treat them with respect a lot of times. And then you've got another situation, right, where you've got that badge not treating people with respect, or even worse in the George Floyd situation, that causes a definite distrust,
Right.
of an earned distrust to that. I assume that's the end goal, though. We're going to marry those two things together, right?
Correct. It's kind of calling it out. It's also looking at training, right? We're not trying to take away from existing training, right? So, for some of your readers, or listeners, if you don't know, you get hired. You go through this whole interview process. The first day of the academy, you get screamed at, push-ups, everything, until you're blue in the face. The downside of that is you take individuals beforehand, and now you punish them for their individuality. And you want to make them all one unit. Okay, so I understand the purpose of that, and there is a purpose, right? When there's chaos all around you, you need to have discipline, and everyone needs to understand command and control. What we're saying at the Curve is, on top of that, not in place of it, but on top of it, we should also teach people human skills, how to sit down and have a really hard conversation with someone, provide constructive criticism, how to show that courageous vulnerability, how to mentor and coach. Like in our profession, when you promote, sometimes people get promoted because they make the most arrests. Well, there's no correlation between the number of productivity and what you do to your ability to lead. And then we send them to schools where they teach them how to do maybe write reports or whatever, or supervise or do evaluations. But leading is different than managing, right? And you know this. And so at every rank, what's missing in our profession, and it's not just our profession, I think many professions do this, as soon as people go into management, it doesn't like they magically all of a sudden know how to lead and inspire people. They generally default to micromanaging and driving people crazy with their own blind spots and stuff like that, right? So the Curve is really to call that out and say, look, leadership it's awesome. It can be inspirational. You can let people be the best version of themselves, not the carbon copy of yourself, right? And so it takes a lot of the inspiration you might have read from Simon's other books in the private sector, and it directly translates into the world of policing.
Oh, yes, it does. So now I'm curious, you've led crisis communications, right? You have a lot of experience in that. What is the biggest mistake that police departments make when they're engaging with their communities during these challenging times? I mean, we saw a lot of that, when all of that happened with George Floyd. And so what is the biggest mistake that they can make?
It's generally a communication mistake. It's it's explaining when really what's needed to learn is listening and hearing. So Simon likes to say true communication is not just listening to the words back and forth, it's listening to the meaning of the words back and forth, right? So if a well-meaning chief or sheriff stands in front of that microphone at a time when there's been maybe a very controversial use of force or something, the community's upset, that's an emotional event, right? And you can't counter emotion with fact. Mm-hmm. So if the police chief goes up there and does not emote any sort of empathy, and is just kind of putting the facts out there and then follows it up with but most cops are good cops. That's a complete it's the tone, the voice, everything. It's just
misaligned.
It's totally misaligned, right?
Yeah.
Not that it's factually incorrect.
Correct.
But so the job of a leader in those situations is to hold space. And we've done that. We had these instances in Mountain View where I directed my staff. I go, our number one job in this next meeting is to listen and make people feel truly heard, right? Resist the urge to come back, and it's just like in our marriages, right? If one spouse is already forming a defense while the other spouse is like, venting, it doesn't bode well, right?
You're not communicating, right?
Right. So communication is the first step. And once people actually feel heard, it opens the doors, and then back and forth, the information goes, and it's a skill. It's a human skill that takes practice. And we need to send our leaders and our folks to learn these skills of listening. And, your nonverbal communication, it means just as much as your verbal, all these types of things. And so without that, this misalignment takes place, and you can tell the departments and the communities that just are not aligned, right? And so it's the step number one for a foundation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can easily see how just miscommunicating one time can cause an entire cultural shift. Mm-hmm. It's unbelievable,
right?
Really.
And this is why it's important for agencies to do the groundwork, right? Officers and deputies to be out there day to day, just showing their own humanity and forming those partnerships. I mean, a lot of them do already, which is what's the saving grace to a lot of communities. But there's some communities out there where it's just outright cold, both ways, right?
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. My stepdad, dad for all intents and purposes, a great guy. He used to, it really irritated him if like parents would tell their kids, oh, you better behave or I'm going to have a police officer arrest you. Yeah. Or, hey, you better behave, that police, anything that was like, we do, but back in the day, and I'm sure it still happens now, but it's even tongue in cheek most of the time, right? Stuff like that. But even he would say, like, I really wish they wouldn't do that, because we're not people that you need to be afraid of, right? We're people that are here holding a peace in the community for everybody. And he really had a clear understanding. Of course, he had risen in the ranks as far as he wanted to go. But yeah, it always, because he's like, perception is everything. Like I don't like to be perceived as the scary guy. I don't want to be perceived as the guy that's here for, to protect and serve. And I think that's something that's missing from general society. And overall, the police haven't gotten a fair shake on that. I don't think at all. And I think it puts them at a disadvantage in a lot of ways. We were just watching it, in fact, on the Netflix thing about the O.J. Simpson trial, and in the lead ups to Rodney King and the riots and the things like that. They were all emotional responses to a very negative, terrible thing that happened to Rodney King, and in many ways wasn't handled correctly, right? And then it leads to these things that just compound, and is taken out on people that don't deserve it later on down the road.
Yeah, I love that story, and that's one reason why, if you'll notice, at the Curve, we specifically don't use the term, or don't like the term, law enforcement. What we do is actually policing, because if you tell, a law enforcement officer, and you just put it there, then your job is to enforce the laws, right? And we know, of course, we take bad guys to jail, 100%. And I'm not at all saying we don't, but that's not the only thing police officers and deputies do. In the normal course of their shift, they're out there just being a part of the fabric of every community. And there's a lot of that does not involve writing tickets and stuff, right? And it's that balance. And so if all we do is call or put a title around it that you're a law enforcement officer, well, then your job is to go out there 100% of the time and just write tickets. And we know that doesn't create great community feeling, right? So again, it's not, there will always be a place for that, and we have to take bad guys to jail. But I'm saying on top of that, like, the job is so much more broad. And when we remind especially our next generation of cops and deputies about that, there's more to this. It's the purpose of policing. It's our why.
Mm-hmm.
I love that delineation.
Well, it just makes sense that it would come from Simon, right? Because he's just sort of famous on that why thing, and we all know it's not, it's not, everybody knows that police officers have never earned what they're worth, right? And then they're putting their life in danger in some cases, in a lot of cases, and they do it. I think at the core, I know it was that way with my friends and their family members and my stepdad. They did it because they enjoyed that. They just enjoyed doing what they did, and definitely wasn't for the money. I mean, they worked constantly and had part-time jobs and things like that just to make the ends meet. They did it because that's really what they enjoyed. And if I think that becomes even more enjoyable if the community also feels that same respect for them, because they notice that, it's not, like you said, just not seen as something like, oh, this guy's pulling me over, he's mean, no, he's just doing a job and you shouldn't have been speeding.
Exactly. So two final questions for you, Chris. First is, how do you see that intersection of civil rights and police culture evolving over the next decade?
When we break it down and we understand we're humans interacting with humans again, that's what's important, right? Like, no laws are perfect, and so at the base of it, we have to treat all humans with dignity, with respect, right? That's just a basic tenet of just how we should operate. And unfortunately, in this age of social media in the last 10 years, we've pretty much forgotten that as a society. I mean, I like to joke about, like, you look on any social media feed, have you ever once seen someone get their mind changed in the comment thread with the back and forth and this and that, right? Never happens.
Never.
And so, that skill of civil discourse and, like, communicating and actually listening and, that interaction, to me is almost like a basic human right, but it's very much of a lost skill.
Mm-hmm. It so is. I'm going to put in a little personal note here, since Michael mentioned the other night when we got pulled over. So I wanted to say that, yes, it was me. I was driving. And what's so funny about it is I come up to this school area where there's a 4-way stop, and I thought to myself, my own voice in my head said, I better come to a complete stop here, total, before I go through this. It was just, something you tell yourself. So I get down to the next stop sign, nobody coming, period. They call it a rolling stop. There was no stop. It was just a roll.
It was
right?
just a roll.
It was a slow roll, but it was a roll. So here I go. And I thought, I get maybe a half mile down the road and the blue lights come on. It's like, well, I was as calm as can be. I said, well, shoot, I'm getting pulled over. I said, I'll bet you it's because I didn't stop at that stop sign completely a while ago. So I pull over. The police officer comes over and he says, yeah, ma'am, you didn't quite come to a complete stop. And I said, I really thought that's why you were going to pull me over. I said, I'm really sorry. I knew I was doing it at the time, and I did it anyway because there wasn't anything coming. I'm sorry. He ended up just giving me a warning. He did not give me a ticket that I have to pay for. Bless his heart. But that is, I say that for this purpose. It all begins, in my opinion, with little small things like that. Instead of arguing with somebody who's very likely has you on camera anyway, right? Why would you argue over
what he pulled you over.
You did it. I've never argued about a speeding ticket. I haven't had one in years, but I've never argued over any speeding ticket I've ever gotten because I was speeding. So what is the point, right? And they're there to keep things safe. So when you do wrong, you need to step up and admit it and say you're sorry, right? Whether you get the ticket or not. I've gotten a ticket most times than not. Very few times have I gotten a warning ticket. But I think it's those small little things of treating each other like human beings. He's there to do a job and keep everybody safe. And probably that time of night we were coming through, more times than not, he finds people intoxicated, people that really shouldn't be driving, and people that end up ending lives sometimes, right? And so you have to look at the big picture of those things. So I just wanted for everybody out there to just give my little 2 cents there, that it literally begins in the smallest of circumstances where nobody was hurt, nobody was even around, but you did the wrong thing. And so that's the way we should treat life. I think it's certainly the way we should treat each other. And we know right from wrong. We all know it. Many of us, weren't raised in a culture that really reflected that very much. But at the heart of all our hearts, we know it. And if we just treat each other with kindness, that's really what it's all about. So there was my soapbox, Chris. Thank you for allowing me to go on.
Absolutely. I'll give you an epilogue and a secret, although it doesn't apply anymore. When I worked the streets, the litmus test in my head of when I would write a ticket versus when I would give a warning would be determined when I walked up to the window and if they understood, I said, "Hey, I pulled you over because of this and that." And if they said, "Yeah, you're right," no ticket. Like, I never wrote a ticket in that case. But usually when they were like, "I absolutely did not," and I'm like, "Well, I worked in the days before camera," but it's like, "Well, no, I clearly saw you blow that stop sign."
Right.
Right. So it's like, okay, but again, it's too late. I've retired already. So that may not work for all the cops out there. I'm just saying that was me.
Well, if I was a cop, it would certainly make me feel better about my job and about this person. It's like, well, they realized what they did wrong. They apologized for it. Maybe, just maybe I'll let them off on this one. So, and it worked the other night, but I shouldn't have done it, but I did. Anyway, here we go. So last question for you, Chris.
How can people learn more about the Curve? How can they participate, help, talk to you? What's the protocol? How can people learn more?
2 places. So LinkedIn, we're very active there if you want to follow us at The Curve. And we do have a website, thecurve.org. That the small funny story there is Simon and I built that with Chief Jack Colley over a weekend where we were like on YouTube, Google searching how to build a website on Squarespace. So
I love
it looks a little, I will tell you this, we are in the middle of a revamp where the professionals are actually redesigning the whole thing. So within a couple months, that's going to launch. But the old one still works for now. So LinkedIn, the website, reach out if you have any questions or if you want to learn more. Happy to chat with anybody.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you very, very much for all your service, what you have, all the time you spent in the police force, and now all the time you spend in the community to uphold the police force. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
You definitely have our support and hopefully support of all our listeners. And if we can help you in any way, Chris, let us know.
Thank you
for your time.
Ready to change how you're seen and charge what you're worth? If you're not getting enough opportunities to meet with ideal customers, or the prospects you're meeting with just aren't ideal, it's most likely your brand that's holding you back. So if you're a coach, consultant, or expert who is on the rise, you need our ultimate guide to a freedom-based brand. Download it free now at brandfaceguide.com.